The first stories about the cat appeared on the banks of the Nile in the 28th century BC. Often, when we talk about ancient Egypt, it is almost impossible to imagine this incredible time volume. Before the pyramids, before all the famous monuments of art, before all those dates, which probably the human civilization considers to be the main dates, there, on the banks of the Nile, a man for the first time in the thickets of the reeds met the one who admired him, the one who inspired him, the one who became an image, an example in many thousands of works of ancient Egyptian art. This meeting took place here, on the banks of the Nile, in the thickets of the reeds, and the research of recent years showed absolutely amazing dates. In the first burials, where a cat was found next to the man, his beloved cat, which followed him to another world, it was possible to find organic monuments, which allowed to give a fairly accurate date for analysis in the middle of the 7th millennium BC. For a long time, that is, we imagine that at least 3 millennia before the appearance of the pharaohs. The oldest human burial with a cat is dated to the 8th millennium BC. This is the famous Cyprus cat, and the result of many studies which were done not only by Egyptologists but also by biologists showed that the cat came to Europe in 2 ways. One cat with reddish fur, with such a classic for Egyptian sculpture wedge-shaped muzzle. It came from Egypt. A completely different, soft, fluffy, small, more familiar for our northern latitudes. It came from the Anatolian coast, from Turkey. But anyway, this story began there in the ancient East, at the first steps of the history of mankind. If a person met a cat here, very often starting to perceive it as a companion of his hunt, he begins to perceive it as a great defender of the crop, of rats and mice. Moreover, the cat also becomes a symbol of protection from great trials. Because throughout the history of antiquity, it happened many times that in that or another era of the brilliant development of the Egyptian civilization, there began wide trade contacts with Asia. Trade contacts of ships, ships of rats, rats a plague. Therefore, on the one hand, the cat was perceived as unpredictable, as a dangerous creature. On the other hand, it was perceived as a defender of the crop and an animal bearing infinite good. And finally, on the third side, which we will be very interested in today, the cat was perceived as a symbol of an indescribable and always changeable female character, in which the line between love and the line between danger is always very thin. And the cat, which is no longer a woman, but still not a lioness in Egyptian mythology, will reflect this thin approach of the Egyptians to what femininity can be through what symbols of world culture, world art this image brought to us. In the collection of the Gregorian Museum in the Vatican, one of the first images of the cat was preserved, which probably best illustrates this hunt in the endless thickets of the papyrus of the Nile Delta. Here is a relief of the 23rd century BC. This is the era of the pyramids. The cat gracefully sneaks along the stem of the papyrus in order to reach its prey. And feeling his fate, the chicks in the nest are trembling like this. This is the example when the talent of the Egyptian artist, through a stone, through a cutter, through a plate of limestone, allowed to understand and convey, of course, for the coming millennia, the amazing world that surrounded the Egyptian. What you see in the extreme lower left corner of the picture is the nose of a reed seal, on which stands a wild boar whose companion during his hunting entertainment in the Nile thickets becomes a cat. This image of the cat in the swamps of the delta will pass through the entire Egyptian culture, and often it is with this image that the great masterpieces of the Egyptian visual art will be associated. I will show you several such images now. If the first relief, I remind you, is of the 23rd century BC, then this is already the turn of the 19th and 18th centuries BC. Many centuries have passed. This monument is already younger. This is an amazing tomb of a wild boar called Khnum-Kateb II. He was the head of the province. Today it is the city of Beni Hassan. You see the Nile thickets again. In the left part, the wild boar with a throwing stick hunts for birds, which symbolise the souls of chaos that oppose the world order. In the right part, with a harpoon, he hunts for fish, and where the fishing will be successful, he is met again by a cat. Unfortunately, many monuments which in the 19th century were an incredible preservation, which were copied by artists, in our 21st century came badly damaged. In order for you to see where the cat is, I will show you a great watercolour copy of this fragment, which was once made by Howard Carter, whom you all know from the discovery of Tutankhamun's tomb. The Nile papyrus, which contains a sweetish core, was a favourite place for the cat, which gnaws at the stems, which hunts, and which, on the one hand, represents the incredible wealth of the Nile nature, and on the other hand, we all know that all Egyptian art is filled with symbols and hypotheses. It reflects here the nature of the sun god. What I mean, I will tell you in a few minutes. Another example which will show you the same plot in a completely different performance. Absolutely brilliant. The 14th century BC. The painting was peeled off the wall of the tomb of the royal master Nibamon and transferred to the London British Museum. This is one of the most famous Egyptian monuments of the London Assembly. Let's look at it. The Nile man, he is sailing along the river Zavod. Zaval, the husband of Nibamon, is standing in the ceremonial attire of his wife, the noble lady. She's wearing a massive blue-black wig, an aromatic cone filled with incense, and a flower of a water lily. She is holding a bouquet of water lilies in her hands. Here, together with the wife's shield, on the bow you see a little girl. This is the daughter of Nibamon and his wife, who live with this wonderful duck and their parents during their Nile journey. Nibamon is holding a throwing stick in his hand again, just like his predecessor Khnum-Hatep II, 500 years before the appearance of this painting. I want you to feel these time giant lags that separate different monuments of Egyptian art. Butterflies are also very good here, but the main plot, of course, is not in it, but in this huge red cat, which is the companion of Nibamon. For us, this is a secular painting, but if we remember that it is from the tomb, we should think about the meanings. A huge red cat embodies the sun god here, the god Ra, and if Nibamon himself, or rather his soul, his subtle entity, hunts in these swamps of the delta in order to pacify the birds of chaos and simplify the order of the world, which was once created by the gods, then the sun god himself, in the form of such a golden companion, is present here next to him. In this painting, which seems to be an amazing secular decorative scene, the secret meaning is hidden, and the message that in another world, Mr. Nibamon want to be Shems, the companion of the sun god, in his great work, in the interpretation of the truth, and in pacifying the chaos. Of course, the Egyptian artist of that time, and this is the golden age of Egyptian art, could afford absolutely impossible things. That's why I'm showing you this absolute Egyptian Impressionism. This is a fragment, as you perfectly understand, of the same image. A cat with a muzzle and a fur coat on its ears. It grabs the first bird it sees as a sign that the chaos will be pacified, as a sign that the order of the world will be permanently established, or Ma'at, as the ancient Egyptians called it. In the oldest texts, in the oldest images, the allegory and connection of the cat with the sun, God, will be very strong. In particular, in the tomb of Zarthutmose III, the first fragment of the painting from this tomb from the 15th century BC, you can see in the lower left corner of the picture, the cat appears as a night form of the sun god. He walks in the darkness and sees what others do not see. In the ancient Egyptian language, the verb twaret is spelled out in the form of an eye hieroglyph. According to the legend, the eternal God, having conceived the heart and realizing what he wants to do, opens his eyes, and at that moment, everything he conceived comes into existence. The cat who sees in the darkness what others do not see, he shouts in the darkness and thus calls the names, secret names, the essence of what should come into existence. I am a great cat. I am Samra, and I am named Khatum, meow. And the God of wisdom said about me, for I meowed at the time when I did the creation, and my name would have existed, and there would have been nothing that existed before me. Like other forms of the sun god, the cat is the one who supports chaos. The main symbol of chaos in the Egyptian religious culture is the grandiose snake Apop, which lives in the waters of the other world, which must crush the solar boat, and accordingly the solar boat must crush the snake Apop, so that the sun would rise on the eastern horizon of the sky, so that the world would come back to life. In the 13th century BC, this wonderful vignette was made for one of the scrolls in the Book of the Dead, which, as you remember, in ancient Egypt was called Nuper Etemeru, the speech of the Exodus in the light of the day, not the Book of the Dead at all. It is a guide telling about the path of the soul of the dead to the great eternal light, to merge with which he must become an immortal spirit. So, on the vignette for the 17th anniversary of this huge text, under the great sacred tree which was dedicated to the sun, this is Perseus, again the cat, in the image of the sun god, with a red fire knife, cuts off the head of the snake of chaos, so that the world would come back to life again, so that the chaos would be erased. In various villages and the most ordinary life of the ancient Egyptians, the cat as a symbol on one side of the feminine nature, and the cat as a symbol of the masculine solar nature, were revered. In the famous village of Deir el Medina, where the artists who built the great royal tombs in the distance of the kings lived, a stela was made for one of the royal artists. And here, in addition to the image of the cat and the cat, a whole hymn was even recorded. Let me remind you, this is also the 13th century BC, the praise of the great cat, the kiss of the earth, before this great God of the sun. Oh, the one who is in the world, who returns to peace. You made me see the darkness of you, created one. Enlighten me so that I could see your beauty. Turn to me, oh, beautiful in the world, pacified, knowing the return to the world. Yes, you give me life, stability and health for my soul. This is the text of the blind man. One more time. You made me see the darkness of you, created one. The cat perceives this prayer addressed to the God of the sun as very personal and reverent, because he addresses the God of the sun through the image of the cat and the cat, through those images that were always close to a person, that were simple, understandable, but nevertheless, throughout all the millennia in Egypt, they had a big, serious culture. The cat was not only the inhabitant of a simple house, but often it appeared in the royal palaces, in the royal chambers. This is a fragment of the relief of the 21st century, the collection of the Metropolitan Museum in New York. Here you see 3 cats, which are part of the hieroglyphic inscription Nebmeu. This is the name of the whole city, the capital of cats. In the Egyptian language, very often the names of animals were homonyms, that is, they somehow reproduce the speech of animals. So Meu is a cat, and Meuid is a cat. Te, traditionally in all ancient Semitic Amitic languages, is a designation of the female genus. The cats entered the royal palace quite quickly, and I will now show you some absolutely amazing evidence of what I am talking about. Let's take a close look at this fantastic painting, which in the 14th century BC was made in the tomb of Anen, the nobleman who was the brother of the great queen Thea. Thea, in turn, was the great wife of the Tsar, the beloved wife of Menhotep III, whom you all know by the Sphinx standing on the embankment of the Neva in St. Petersburg. The Tsar's cheetah is sitting. The pharaoh himself. Unfortunately, the upper part of the painting has not survived. The richest throne, magnificent bouquets of Nile plants and water lilies in front of him. Behind the Tsar's back sits his wife. In her hand, she holds a magnificent bouquet in the form of a symbol of eternal life, and under the throne of the queen, her beloved animals are a monkey, a cat, and a goose. Here is an absolutely amazing thing. The fact is that the dog for the ancient Egyptians was always a domestic animal, and a monkey, a cat, a goose, and a snake were domestic animals. It is clear that as a snake, some not particularly poisonous creatures were perceived, but a snake, for example, was considered the keeper of people from bad dreams. There was a lot of other symbolism. In fact, all this is perfectly clear because if you imagine even a modern Egyptian village, then this border between the desert and the inhabitants of the desert, and on the other side, the border between the rocks and the earth is very thin, and creatures from the green fields, and on the contrary, from the desert zone easily cross this border. Due to the fact that in front of us is a great house, that is a palace, everything here exists in a certain unwavering idyll. And in order to emphasize this idyll, the artist shows a cat that gently hugs the neck of the favourite goose of the queen. And this whole scene shows that love, the absolute absence of chaos or any evil that is present in this incredible, I will say this word, glamorous scene for the ancient Egypt from the 14th century to the new era. An amazing monument which is kept in the collection of the Egyptian Museum in Cairo shows us those feelings that sometimes someone from a member of the royal family could feel for his favourite animal. Amenhotep III, the Queen Thea, who we just talked about, had a favourite son, Thutmose. He was the elder son of the king, and he had a favourite cat. The cat died during the life of its owner, and this magnificent sarcophagus, it reproduces the expensive noble sarcophagi of that time. Let's see what is depicted on it. In the centre there is a cat in its life form. Note that it has a characteristic necklace, and the counterweight of this necklace shows that this necklace is associated with the cult of the goddess of love, the goddess Hathor. The cat sits in front of the victim. It has vessels with Ertet. Ortet is sacred milk. A very appetizing goose lies in the centre of the victim. Special bread. Further images show it in the form of a mummy. in the form of embalmed remains that were once placed in this sarcophagus. The inscriptions that flank the image from all sides glorify it, call on the spirits of the new world to protect the cat in their space. Finally, they even identify it with Osiris, the great ruler of the other world, the deity who, according to the legend, won death in the first place, regained resurrection, and through identification with him, every Egyptian hoped to gain immortality. Finally, in the inscription that literally flows from one image of the cat to another, at the level of their heads, its nickname is written as a cat with a certain article, a special cat, a cat with a capital letter, which once deserved to be the Tsar's favourite. The amazing evidence that is kept in many museums of the world showed how beloved the animal was at times. But if here was embodied on the one hand the call of such pain of the Tsarevich for the beloved lost animal, on the other hand, the Tsar's great opportunity to make such a beautiful sarcophagus for his beloved, then probably the most striking example of such love for the animal is the 13th century BC, the burial of the Tsar's artist Hapuman, who asked to make a sarcophagus for him a little longer than his body in order to put a long dead embalmed beloved cat, which was put in the sarcophagus in order to make it not only his companion, but also a guide through the secret areas of the other world, and we will talk about it today. Sometimes the cat was a creature that could not be ignored in the case of such an absolutely amazing work that shows the family of a highly revered person. Here is Epui, the great Tsar's artist of the 13th century BC. Great Tsar's tombs were made under his command. On the one hand, together with Epui himself, his wife is sitting behind him, the victim is in front of them, and then there are two more figures. This is Epui's son, in turn, with his wife. The victim, whose locate, as if in the middle of the scene, divides the world of the living and the world of the dead. Epui is actually already dead, and his own son, wearing the leopard skin of the priest for the deceased cult, performs the funeral service of his beloved father. This image, in addition to the wigs, in addition to the plaited linen clothes, in addition to the amazing wide moustache, which of course the great Tsar's artist could afford, is famous for cats. I will show you now two enlarged images so that you can appreciate the artist's work. Look at this wonderful kitten sitting on his lap. He is licking the plaited linen clothes of his master. I remind you that this is the image of the deceased man. Most likely, these are their beloved cats who have also gone to another world. And finally, the second cat, which is depicted under the chair of Epui's wife, in violation of all the canons of Egyptian art, is depicted looking into the face and showing this large image. Yes, the image is wonderful. The artist could afford to break the canon at least on the example of a cat, not a human, which required a lot of conditions to depict the animal he wanted to show. But showing this enlarged fragment, I want to return to one very simple and sad thought. When at the beginning of the 20th century, the great artist Nina de Harris Davis was working with this painting, an American woman who made a maximal copy, the painting was almost intact. This is the picture made 15 years ago. How fragile is the legacy we're talking about? On the one hand, we admire the past millennia. On the other hand, now, in our conditions, we are talking about monuments that are slowly disappearing. And sometimes they remain in our circulation in the form of maximal copies. In the Egyptian art world, there was a special idea that the artist had an incredible freedom of sketching when he was not working with a project connected to the wall of a tomb, but when he took an ostrakon. An ostrakon is a piece of limestone or a ceramic fragment. This is a cheap material because papyrus was very expensive. And on this ostrakon, the artist drew what he wanted. He drew a horse digging a hole, or he drew a girl who bent over a tandoor and lit a fire under the stove, or he drew a cat, just as the official canon of Egyptian art forbade. But the artist, of course, wanted to depict what he saw and to capture it for himself. In the south of Egypt, in the present-day Luxor, in this village of the builders of the royal tombs, there was a beautiful area that was a village dump. A dump, as you know, is a mecca for an archaeologist, because there, in this dump, in this huge pit, they threw off unnecessary sketches, and all of them were preserved from the 15th, 14th, 13th, 12th centuries BC, while this village existed. This ostrakon, like many others, is also from this amazing collection that the great French Egyptologist Jean Huyot called a notebook of sketches of the Egyptian artist. These are amazing evidence that show us human feelings and what the artist wanted to depict. In the paintings of the Great New Kingdom, that is the 15th, 11th centuries BC, the cat is present in many images. I will show you a few examples so that we can get a little closer to the world in which the cat of the Egyptian house lives. These are paintings with images of feasts for the dead and the living. There are noble ladies sitting, chromatic cones on their heads again, plaited translucent clothes, incredible luxury. Who is sitting under the chair? Of course, the beloved cat. And here she sits not only because cats were worn during the feast. Those who have been to Egypt know how many cats live in the city of Cairo. This is a completely separate space. She is also a symbol of grace and beauty of those ladies under whose chair she sits. Because with the themes of beauty, grace, sexuality, fertility and aromas, these are the 5 main principles. The cat will always be connected. Each of these principles on a separate monument we will see today. Let's take a few more examples of how a cat could be depicted on a feather. Look at the work. She bent down. She just drank into this delicious fish that the hostess threw at her, whose legs you see here on the painting next to the chair. But some cat was not very lucky. Apparently the cat was very valuable, therefore a collar, a rope, a standing bowl of meat, and this chair on which the feasting guests sit, and the nature of the cat, which does not tolerate the lack of freedom, is beautifully expressed by this paw that tries to break the leash, free itself, and finally reach that very bowl of meat on which this cat from the tomb of Maya at the end of the 15th century BC so greedily looks. An amazing monument from the Metropolitan Museum collection. This painting and this amazing sample of Egyptian round sculpture are 500 years old, 5 centuries. The sculpture is older. 19th century BC, the monument is made of alabaster, a favourite material of ancient Egyptians, a stone that resembles a semi-transparent oil. The geological name is travertine. We conventionally call it Egyptian alabaster. The eyes are inserted, the eye shells are made of a thin copper frame, and 2 massive eyes made of a mountain crystal with a substrate that depicts a rainbow shell. It is so amazingly done here. If you look closely at this work, you will see a hole that has been preserved from time immemorial. You understand that it is hollow. This is a vessel for aromas. Courtyard ladies, there is a hole on the theme of the cat that was closed with a small tube, and this vessel, about 16 centimetres high, was used for particularly expensive perfumes that were associated with the cat here. And here, of course, you will ask me, well, yes, how do we know? It is so detailed. The fact is that, of course, you are well aware that the great goddess of cats in ancient Egypt is Bastet. We will talk about her a lot today. The literal translation of the name Bastet is that of a vessel with a divine aroma. She is originally a goddess associated with the divine. Therefore, to make a bottle in the image of a cat was, on the one hand, a beautiful thing that stood on the toilet table of a noble lady, and on the other hand, it is a hint that it is a vessel. It is a goddess who, with her mysterious aromas, preserves the youth, the health of this lady, who preserves it from damage and wear. But here is another very interesting detail. This is the oldest three-dimensional sculptural image of a cat in the history of world art. Again, the 19th century BC, the Metropolitan Museum of New York. Among all those hundreds of thousands of cats that remained from the ancient Egyptian civilization, I, of course, must show you the main masterpiece. At one time, at the very end of the 19th century, an amazing person appears in Cairo. He was a military officer and a military doctor. His name was Robert Geyer Anderson, and becoming a personal doctor of King Fuad, he at some point buys two houses of the 16th century that completely preserved the original interior. These two houses were connected by a bridge. Today it is an amazing museum of Geyer Anderson, which is called, in Arabic, the House of the Cretan Woman, because there was originally a very rich Arab doctor who had a Cretan wife. Throughout his career, this man, who had a fantastic taste, filled this house with incredible works of art from ancient Egypt to the works of the Ottoman Empire. As a result, in 1943, when he left Egypt as an old man because he had to return to England to get some necessary medical care, he sold 12 items, leaving absolutely everything, many thousands of things, in the inheritance of the Egyptian people. He vowed to nationalise his museum. If you are in Cairo, be sure to look there. But the main masterpiece, of course, he needed money. He sold it to the British Museum. This is the famous Cat Geyer Anderson. Let's take a look at it now. She is absolutely incredibly good. Unfortunately, of course, the author is not known, but this is the turn of the 7th to 6th centuries BC. It is made of copper alloy. It weighs 19 kilograms. 43 centimetres in height. She has gold jewellery in her ears and nostrils. A sacred scorpion crawls on her head, a symbol of the morning sun. She has a wide necklace on it, which is also full of symbolism. Let's take a closer look at it. First of all, I would like to draw your attention to the shape of the wool in her ears. The shapes resemble a reed feather. The fact is that in the Egyptian language, Miuti, Kat and Maati, the words of truth sounded very close. Therefore, the reed feather, the symbol of the goddess of truth, becomes the shape under which the wool is stylized in the cat's ear, a sign that this is a goddess who speaks the truth. On the wide necklace, which is so clearly visible here on the cat's chest, there is an alloy of gold and silver with the image of the Eye of Horus, the main symbol of immortality in ancient Egyptian culture, which at the same time was revered as the symbol of the sun, the symbol of the right eye of the predestined God. The right eye of the predestined God is the sun. The left eye is the moon. Finally, on the forehead of the sun-rising ship, as a sign that the cat is associated with the rise, with regeneration, with the victory over death, just like a flying ship pushing the sun with its front legs on the chest of this wonderful statuette. The most interesting thing was inside. This is a reliquary. Once there was an embalmed mummy of some famous temple cat, which was either known as Oracle or was known for its healings. Then it was placed in such a reliquary, and then some very wealthy person brought such a thing home as a great treasure after the complete embalming of the great city of Bubastis, the sacred city of the goddess of the cat, which we will also learn a lot about today. The monument on the one hand is absolutely exceptional, and on the other hand, look at how simple the plastic is. This is a great feature of Egyptian art. They know how to convey very subtly, very clearly and very accurately. They were great animalists, of course, but still the cat of Geir Andersen is a great legend among all the other cats of ancient Egypt. The story of the cat is associated with an ancient and very important for the Egyptian worldview legend. Now in front of you is one of the arks, that is huge wooden boxes embalmed with gold, inside which were the sarcophagi and mummies of Tutankhamun, 14th century BC, Cairo, Egyptian Museum. You see on the wall of the arks a huge cow which walks along the golden background. Under the cow there are many male deities who support her legs and in every way prevent her from moving. In the image of the great cow is venerated Nut, the goddess of the sky. According to the legend, it is on the back of this cow that the great sun god sends his heavenly passion. The Egyptians believed that there was originally a golden time, a golden century, they called it Pahut, when the gods lived with people, when there was no death, when there was no trouble, when there was no betrayal, and there was no time. The time of the most terrible enemy of man and the universe is the symbol of death. At some point, people rise up against the sun god, against their own creator, because the world they owned seemed too close to them. The sun god is confused because, according to the Egyptian legend, people are created from the tears of God. That is, they are part of his flow. And at some point, after a long council of all gods, Nun is called. Nun is the great forefather of the ocean of chaos, the great father of all gods, what it all came from, and then what it will come to at the end of the world. On the one hand, Nun is an extremely important god for the ancient Egyptian culture, because it is the original substance from which the universe arose. On the other hand, like all original gods, he is formidable. Nun always gives some advice when he is called, on the verge of extermination of humanity, or some intermediate solutions are not typical for this deity. And then Nun, called by the state of sleep in the world created, he gives advice to the sun god to call his daughter. We remember that God, according to one version about cosmogony, creates the world by opening the eye. The eye is ear to create. Ireth. The eye, according to the ancient Egyptian feminine gender, the eye is she, and as a result, from the eye of the sun god comes out his beloved daughter who has many faces. One of these faces is the golden goddess of love, Hathor, leading, as the texts say, all the secrets of the female heart. The other opposite is Sekhmet. This is a great, powerful, lion-headed goddess who supports all those who are not able to keep order. The sun goddess, having accepted her fantastic, beautiful, but very furious, flaming, lion-shaped form, went out to the great fields and tamed the people. And at that moment, when there were very few people left, as the text of the Book of the Cow says, written next to the image that you have just seen on the Ark of Tutankhamun and also found in several royal tombs. This text is very sacred. The text says that the heart of the sun god became merciful, and he realized that people would now disappear. And then he brewed beer, got the sacred stone of Didi, this is hematite blood, ground this hematite, mixed it with beer, and poured the beer into the fields. And the great lion-headed goddess saw a sea of blood, and she drank this blood. And her heart was healed, and she was drunk and passed by people without noticing. After the night of intoxication, remember this term, the night of intoxication is useful to us today. There is always a morning of sobriety. And when the great flaming lichen, as the texts of the goddess call her, regained her sobriety, she realized that she had been deceived, and she went to a distant country, to a certain African country, to Buhum. The literal translation of this name is from ancient Egyptian, to a place where they will find her, a place of finding. Along with her, Pava de Nila left. Along with her, the fertility of the Egyptian land left. Along with her, although she was in such seemingly terrible form, love left. Along with her, life left. And as the text says, the altars of the gods were lowered in the sign of incredible poverty which reached the earth. And then the great sun god realized that the daughter had to be returned. He took the god of wisdom, Toto, and the god of air, Shu, because without air there is no breath, turns them into little baboons, and the baboons follow the great angry goddess in horror that she tears them apart with the task of returning the daughter to her father. Before we learn the continuation of the legend, I will say just a few words about this great monument. This is a cult statue of the goddess Semet from the end of the 15th century to the new era. See what a work! And still in Karnak, in the great temple in Luxor, she stands in her own sanctuary. These are all three images of the same statue. On the one hand, a woman, on the other, a lioness, a solar disc on her head in the sign of her solar nature, and a huge cobra, a sacred urn on her forehead. But despite all the rage, she has a scepter in the form of a papyrus stem, Waj, health, youth, unchangeable youth. In the other hand, she holds the symbol of eternal life. Believe me, because all Egyptian deities are ambivalent, and just like the great mother of rage drinks blood, only she, according to Egyptian legends, is able to fight the most terrible diseases. She is the great mother of medicine, and her high priestess Urzun, the great doctor Yvonne, is the main doctor of his time in those temples of the mother goddess, which were associated with the great rhinoceros god. When you enter the sanctuary of Sekhmet in the temple of the Memphis Triad in Karnak, it is actually a small room. At some point, when the eyes get used to the light, you slowly see the image coming from the darkness, made by an absolutely genius sculptor. Or, if you're very lucky, at a certain hour of the day, through the light hatch, the sun slowly descends on the statue. At some point, it just exists for a few minutes inside this pillar of light. According to Egyptian legends, it is at this moment, which usually coincided with the worship, that the statue enters the soul of the goddess for a few moments, after which she lets out a great grace around her in the universe. The statue itself is not an object of worship in ancient Egypt, only that which enters it, or the active spirit of the deity, as the Egyptian texts say. Far south of Egypt, in Nubia and Dhaka, there is this small temple. The temple is dedicated not only to the wisdom of Toto, but also to the great acquisition, because this is the place where the little Pavians found the enraged lioness, and then the insidious Pavians told her about how delicious the food in the homeland is, told her about what music is fashionable in the homeland now, told her about what clothes are worn in the homeland now, and told her fairy tales that are told to children in the homeland. And the heart of the great lioness began to calm down. From there, from Dhaka, there is this remarkable relief with an image of a baboon who, in the pose of prayer, stretching his palms in the pose of adoration to the great lioness, tells her about the legends of the homeland. At this moment, there is a marriage between the great goddess and Shu, the god of the air, a sign that she has already begun to calm down. And now you see the lioness with her father. She is already a mother. She is ready to give birth to her children, because a mother who carries a new life in her womb and a new day cannot bear anger and evil in herself. And even if she is aggressive at this moment, aggression here is perceived as a form of protection, that she protects her future child or a new day, because this new day, a new life, a new turn of the great universal cycle is enclosed in the child that the great goddess will give birth to. The goddess with a triumph returns to Egypt. Baboons play musical instruments. Bes, the ruler of the house, the protector of pregnancy, the protector of the mother and her baby, meets the great goddess playing with her fingers, picking up the strings, playing the harp that is played here. The whole of Egypt rejoices, and on the border of Egypt and Nubia, on the island in the centre of Nile, such an amazing open kiosk was built. This is the kiosk of Kirtasi. It never had a roof, and at the moment when the goddess should appear according to the ritual calendar, the great priests play the harp here, burn incense. They lure the goddess back to Egypt, and according to the tradition, together with the coming goddess, at this moment in Egypt, the Nile wreaths come. The waters of the Nile rise and carry the blessed Nile, renewing the whole world around it. And Herat, the goddess, the lion-headed goddess, begins to transform from an extremely angry form of female character into a more merciful one. And here, of course, this transformation which coincides with such a Nile wreath. It is today the Nile of Luxor. It is really of such a colour. It is blue to this day. It is an absolutely incredible spectacle. Just like the width of the greatest river in Africa, it is, of course, grandiose. It is somewhere in the middle. This is a sweet shot that is a completely grandiose scale. Here, this piece of the goddess, without realizing her marriage, without realizing her motherhood, is impossible. In the temple of the god Hora, the god of heaven, in Egypt, there is this wonderful scene. Let's look at it. The god Hora, with the head of falcons in the crown of the king of Upper and Lower Egypt, is a happy groom. He is carried in a palanquin by the spirits with the heads of falcons and jackals. These are the spirits that represent the oldest kings of Egypt, whose names are already forgotten. They have become such memorable spirits, which are remembered in a generalized form. In front of them there's a king, in this case Ptolemy VI. That is, it is already the 3rd century BC. He carries in his hands a ritual brush, a sister, a musical instrument, and a lamp filled with olive oil. That is, this is a lamp that emits aromas. In front of him is a bride. The bride is a lion-headed, furious, impudent, but only inside this marriage will she receive the pacification of the heart and the pleasure of the heart. These are the two important points that are exchanged in the process of marriage, the male and female beginning. The Egyptian texts, analysing this legend and supplementing it with all sorts of morphological aspects, tell another absolutely amazing image associated with the great bride, which I can't help telling. The great bride, at the peak of her anger, is a huge black scorpion with fiery eyes, and she has an epithet, a crumb that is in the hands of the sun god, a crumb that is in the hands of Ura. And, in general, the risky groom Hordikdetsky marries this beautiful lady. But interestingly, in the process of divine marriage, he deprives her of her anger, and she's filled with this pacification. And the poison that enters his body at the time of marriage becomes a medicine for him. He kills all the diseases that are in his body. And again, from this successful marriage, a child of the new day is born. Rituals of pacification of the angry goddess were very important for ancient Egypt. And despite the fact that I'm showing you a lioness, cats have the most direct relationship. The great Abbasid became a cat only in the middle of the 2nd millennium BC. The primordial is a dangerous and furious lion-headed goddess. In fact, the next step from Sekhmet at the time of her pacification. Let's go back for a second to the divine marriage. Once a year there was a great holiday, and from the temple of the goddess Kador, the goddess Denderskaya, the great goddess of love, the golden boat of the goddess Sekhmet, this is her image, the bride goes to the groom. The nose and the mouth of this huge boat, which was always made only from a precious cedar tree, which the Egyptians brought from the Livonian mountains, are decorated with aegis. This is an image of a lioness's mask and a huge necklace at Sekhmet. Such aegis were perceived as a bright ritual personification of the goddess, and sometimes they were absolutely incredible. This is a genuine one. This is from the 9th to 8th century BC in the Museum of the Walters Gallery. The golden aegis with the mask of the goddess Sekhmet, this huge sun necklace, and a special handle which symbolises the body of the goddess pregnant with the baby of the new day. The boat comes to the temple. The goddess is not yet completely pacified. She is in the anger that people themselves gave birth to when they rebelled against the sun god. Therefore, the most difficult ritual, which is called Udanet, flying dedicate to the goddess, should pacify her. This is a boat. There is a king. These are gifts. What do angry women get? Aromas, wine, gold, jewellery, which are made from her sacred stones, from the stone of Mafkat, the great turquoise, from the stone of Hesmon, the great amethyst, from the stone of that which is brought from the lands far away for Egypt. I mean, of course, Hesbet, the great Badakhshan lazurite, which is the third stone associated with the cult of the goddess and the cult of her sacred objects. Of course, there is a special role in these offerings. Here is a red rectangle which shows the place where the aromas are taken. And these vessels, in the form of cut cones, the vessels of Bas, the vessels for the special sacred aromas, and there are the same vessels from which the goddess Bastet. This is the one from the vessel of Bas. The green-headed goddess, who appears in the most incredible forms, this colossal statue of Sekhmet, from the 14th century to the new era, the Luxor Museum of Egyptian Art, begins a slow transformation, a slow pacification, a slow acceptance of the world in which she is revered. What else does the goddess love? The goddess loves music. She commands it. She loves the sacred word. She loves poetry. That is, she loves fine arts. Further, the text on this column, depicting the king, the long-haired, angry mother of gods, says, look how he dances, look how he dances. The king performs a sacred dance in front of the cult statue of the goddess, while the great priests who do not have the right to enter the Holy of Holies in the previous hall play on huge harps, not always priests, sometimes priests. The great temple harp Dodat was 2 people tall. It is held by 2 people and only a male harp player because it is a hard physical labour. As a result, in the space of sound in the clouds of Ladan and Mur, which have always been the sacred aromas of the goddess, especially Mur. Mur is a very feminine aroma in the culture of ancient Egypt. The goddess begins to transform. Of course, there are many stages. Here's another image. This is a column of the Temple of the Gods, Numa, in Esna, the 2nd century of the New Era. The king holds the harp in one hand, and on the other hand he pours seeds of a specific plant. Silphium is a narcotic plant, and it is a plant that is associated with the intoxication of the goddess, as with that stage of her character development, when she is not able to direct a direct blow to the one in front of her. And one more thing, of many, I choose, you understand, I choose small points, what you see in the king's hands. This is an image of a baboon, and behind him is a vertical cylinder. This is a clepsydra. This is a water clock. It is called in ancient Egyptian Unheb. He brings a clock to her, a sign that everything changes in cycles of time. The time of anger has gone. The time of motherhood has come. The time of happiness will come. This bringing of time is a very important concept for ancient Egyptians, that even the time of death can be used to renew vitality. The clepsydra becomes a cat, a magnificent amulet in the image of the goddess Bastet, the same Hesmon, a magnificent amuletist from a private French assembly. The cat is already walking on the southern borders of Egypt. To say in more detail, those who love Egyptian geography, the huge temple of the goddess Sida on the island of Philae, next to the sacred island of Abaton, the island of silence. On it is a giant lake. Sekhmet enters the lake of Levites and comes out of it as a cat. Then when she sees all the gifts, all that love, all that reverence with which the great goddess meets Egypt, she turns into the great golden goddess of love. One of the most amazing images of the goddess of love of the 4th century BC carving on a cedar tree. This is part of a huge wooden box for the cult statue of the goddess from the Metropolitan Museum in New York. Another animal that is associated with the goddess is a cow, because the goddess is a great provider of nutrition and milk, therefore not a cow's ears, and a characteristic huge cathartic wig with curls, which always distinguishes the goddess of love from all the other many goddesses of the Egyptian pantheon. Therefore, in the great temples of the goddess, there will be either a golden Kador or a linen-headed Semet. The story of the cat is significant. Inside the back wall of the Kador temple in Dendersk, there is a secret chamber where once was one of the cult statues of the goddess. This wall is actually there. Here you see the mask of the goddess in her cathartic wig. The sun descends on her. The goddesses of the horizon guard this great event. There are many, many, many symbols that I will not go into. There is no such task today. A cat sitting on the horizon. Or, as in the 8th century, the great priest Nespoheran will sing about it. A lazurite cat of the horizon, the same cat that gives hope that the lioness has already left and a golden woman will come. But the unpredictability of the cat is that no one knows who she will become next. A woman or a lioness again? This is a thin, very special facet of the manifestation of female character in the divine world of ancient Egypt. On this pot, which dates to the 28th century BC, the name of the goddess Bastet, think about it, the 28th century BC, between this pot and the Pyramid of Giza is 150 years. The pot is older. Moreover, in 2008, the great German archaeologist Gunther Dreyer, who worked in Abydos next to the ancient tombs of the kings of Egypt, found fragments of ceramics with images of a cat. That is, the name was written in the 28th century BC, and part of the religious ritual, part of the religious mythological culture of the cat was much earlier. In many centres, cats have preserved absolutely amazing images. Today we are talking about many minerals. Look at the amazing image of the goddess Bastet. She is also a lioness here. This is ametrine. This is a transitional form from amethyst, which has a lilac, yellowish and greenish form. This is an amazing monument. This is a national treasure of the province of Sharqiya in the north of Egypt. You will never see it. It is not exhibited anywhere. This is also a hint of what treasures are in the national treasures of Egypt. Maybe in future museums, all this will also be shown. And finally, here is such an image, also quite unexpected. This is a private collection of Giorgio Ortiz, Lausanne, a cat sitting on a flower of a water lily. The water lily opens, dawn comes, the sun is born from it. And the sun here is not just Ra, but Raid, the one from the sun, a great sunny daughter who can wear not only this dangerous power of the mother of anger, but also grace, and fertility, which a sacred cat necessarily carries in itself. I will spend a little time and tell you about several main temple centres of the goddess Bastet, which were so famous, the Egyptian land. The northeast delta, where the red circle of the city was called in ancient Egypt Perbastet. In Greek times it was called Bobastis, and so the city entered the history of archaeology. Today it is the outskirts of the modern city of Ez-Zagazig. The city was grandiose. Unfortunately, Zagazig, which stepped on the temple, turned it into a great sanctuary of the goddess in a quarry. Therefore, many structures of the temple did not reach our time. The temple began to be excavated in the 19th century, namely in 1886. The great Swiss Edouard Naville begins to look for the temple. Where do the locals bring in abundance of bronze cat figurines? The same figurines that were so popular among European collectors. Then this series of amazing shots with excavations of the temple of Bastet in Bobastis begins. This is an Egyptian woman who served on the excavation next to a huge capitella in the form of the great goddess Hathor from the temple of Bastet in Bobastis. First, a few shots of the chronicle, and then I will try to explain to you how the temple looked like. You turn on your imagination and we will imagine this temple in all sorts of analogies. Here is the beginning of the excavations. That is, all this was simply covered not just with sand but with Nile silt. Because the great Pelusian Nile after Cairo, the Nile is now divided into two sleeves. In ancient times there were 9 of them. This is a question of hydrology of North Africa. Today the Pelusian Nile is such a ditch with mosquitoes, and my first archaeological experience was in 1998 in Bobastis. I know this well on my own skin. It's not easy to live there, It's a swamp with a tropical smell. Because it's Africa, there's a lot of sun, and the Nile was flooded more than once in this zone, so everything here was covered with these deposits. Primarily from the city of Bobastis, which was the extreme northeast outpost of Egypt, there was a prototype of the Suez Canal, the Pelusian Nile with a special man-made canal, Hatshepsut, a woman pharaoh in the 15th century BC, connected it with the Bitter Lakes and the Red Sea. When the Nile rose in July, this whole zone became a shipyard and ships sailed south to the territory of modern Somalia for ladin, myrrh and other incense, which was mainly produced from this zone. The city was very rich and rich in construction because initially there was a very developed economic community which included both Egyptians and the people who came here from Syria, Phoenicia and Palestine and later Israel. There was a huge shopping centre here. And then, under these layers of the Nile sand, amazing monuments began to appear. Portraits of kings, huge columns, fragments of grandiose stone walls. The excavations on the Nile simply shocked the whole world. Look at these colossal images of kings. These are all monuments from the 13th to the 12th century BC. As a result, the city of the goddess Bastet began to appear in front of archaeologists. Gradually, many years of study of this complex allowed me to imagine what the temple of the goddess Bastet looked like. While I was running, I will show you the footage, and in a few minutes I will explain what was part of what structure. Well, what a tragedy. The fact is that Edouard Nabil represented the Egyptian Exploration Society, the British Society. The best finds were not just brought from Egypt. They were distributed between England, America and Australia. This capital with the image of the goddess Hathor stands today in the centre of the Egyptian Hall of the Paul Nicholson Museum in Melbourne. That is, the temple of the goddess was literally dragged between European countries, China, America, and I must surprise you, even Australia. There are also good Egyptian collections thanks to archaeologists, but despite the preservation of the temple, this is what the territory of the temple looks like today. A huge number of blocks covered with reliefs, prayers, texts, images, and of course, the goddess Bastet is present here quite often, more often in lion-headed form. Here is a relief from the 9th to 8th century BC. At that time, Bobastia became the capital of Egypt. The pharaohs who seized the throne were the descendants of this city. And for some time, the great city became the capital of the whole country. Let's try to imagine what it is. Here is the yellow zone of aerial photography. This is an ancient city. The temple of the goddess Bastet is a large black structure. Zone A is the temple of Mahisa, her son. And the rest of the zone is not only a city, but also a necropolis, and it is literally fenced off from the modern city of Zagazig, so that the city does not step on the ancient sanctuary. Let's try to imagine what this sanctuary consisted of. Huge granite gates of Tsar Osirkon I. Letter B is the entrance to the territory of the temple. Then there is a hall with huge columns that reproduced the trunks of the phoenix palms. We'll see it now. At the next gate there were the colossi of the queens who went to the pilgrimage to the house of Bastet in Bobastis. Further are the processional roads and a column hall with cathartic capitals. Each column of this hall depicted a sister, a musical instrument ringing in the glory of the goddess. Finally, another hall of the Holy of Holies where the cult statue of the goddess Bastet once stood. Everything, like all other Egyptian temples, is kind of stringed a single axis. For us in Zone B, there is an entrance to the temple. For the temple, there is an exit, because the goddess goes out on her sacred boat during the holidays, which are called How, to bring the sacred grace into the profane world. Another very interesting thing, the last letter here is Ulvil, the well of Roman times. Here it is. This well later, when the temple in Bastet began to come to nothingness, the early Christians declared it the well with which Mary drank with Christ when she was saved by the Egyptians. Until now in Bubastis, that is, in the city of Zagaziki, a woman who is unhappy in her personal life or wants to give birth to a child comes at night, buying security, to the temple. She takes a big clay vessel and fills it with water. The water is very high there. She pours this water on herself and beats the vessel in front of her. This is what the great-grandmothers pass on to their granddaughters. Until now, despite the official 90% of Islam and 10% of Christianity, all this exists, and almost in every Egyptian sanctuary such things still exist. Among the blocks, a huge number of such giant granite slabs covered with myriads of all sorts of sacred scenes that tell about the holiday said. This is the holiday of the renewal of the king's vital forces. All these huge slabs were the gates, these parts, these giant gates of the king from the time of Sargon I. This is the frontier from the 10th to the 9th century BC. You will not see them now, and they will never be recreated because, for example, this is the British Museum. There's also the Louvre. There is also what was brought to Germany. The most valuable pieces of the gates were simply plundered at the end of the 19th century between European museum collections. Imagine, not just the granite gates, all the images were painted. Moreover, about a third of the gates were covered with gold leaf. There were holes with wooden, I don't remember the name in general, wooden plates in which a nail is hammered in order to hold the gold leaf. Oh, thank you. And the golden gates of the goddess, the giant doors that were considered the souls of the goddess, that were made of the black wood covered with electrum. A flagpole with coloured flags is a sign that the goddess is present in her house. We go inside the church through these gates, and in the yard we see the most interesting parts of the complex that were found in such a state. First, these are colonnades that imitate the palm grove in which the goddess walks. The columns are made of granite. They were 12 metres high and were richly painted in polychrome so that they imitated these amazing thickets of the palm grove. You go through the palm grove, and at the next gates you meet the colossi of the queens who wanted to leave a special memory about their pilgrimage to the church of the mother goddess. That upper part is the colossus of the queen Meritamun, the beloved daughter of Ramses the Great. This is how it was raised by the German scientists from Potsdam who work here. But there is a problem. It is not so far from the Mediterranean Sea, salty groundwater. The upper part is completely preserved. The wig, the sceptre, the face, everything that was in the ground is completely eroded. It is always removed only from the side, because on the other hand, it is just an eroded giant rock. So at least some evidence about the great daughter of Egypt of the 13th century BC, who was here once. We go further, and the next hole I show you an arrow. The columns are made of granite. The columns are made in the form of bouquets of papyrus buds. This hall imitated the pre-eternal thickets of reeds, inside which a swamp flower appears on the petals of which the sun and its daughter are born. In order for you to imagine how it looked, I will show you the preserved hall of the same columns in the temple of Amenhotep III in Luxor, the 14th century BC. The difference is quite large, but the typological architecture is exactly the same. That is, first the palm forest, then the columns, then more and more these pine thickets. Finally, in the presence of the holy goddess, the columns in the form of huge sisters. I specifically show you a drawing of the end of the 19th century with the image of the temple of the goddess Cador Denderi, in order for you to imagine how these columns looked in the 19th century. But in the 19th century, they were mostly pulled apart by milling mills. They are round, granite. It is convenient to grind bread. Therefore, what is still in the beginning of the 19th century on the old engravings, drawings, for example, the satellites of the Napoleon expedition, the expedition of Napoleon Bonaparte, what lies literally preserved later after 50 to 60 years was dismantled by the local residents. But yes, Dendera is insanely beautiful. I specifically show you a drawing, not a photograph, so as not to distract you from the great temple of the goddess of love. Yes, 12 metres, approximately the same, and now a few numbers: 12 tons, 700 kilograms, 1.78 metres in height. This is only this upper part of the column capital, made of granite. Now Boston, the Museum of Fine Arts of the United States of America, and now you imagine that you are entering the hall from the thicket of the eternal reed. It was called the Hall of the Bell of the Goddess because it is a symbolic image of musical instruments that ring and glorify the goddess. But not only. Bell and sound are life. Silence is death. Breathing is life. Breathlessness is death. That is here, inside these stone musical instruments, the goddess, the great ruler of the sides of the world, is perceived as the great subject of life. This is what it looks like today. A sad sight, isn't it? But still, I take analogies so that you can imagine what it looked like once. Finally, the Holy of Holies. I show you the sanctuary of the temple of the god Hora in Edfu, far in the south of Egypt, so that you can also use this photo and several important monuments that I will show you now to imagine what the Holy of Holies. This is a small dark room, small for a temple and majestic for us. On a special pedestal stood the goddess's boat. This is a model made by Polish archaeologists for the temple of the god Hora. So here, of course, the head of the falcons. I will show you now from Louvre a monument of the 9th century BC with an image of a banner which in turn is made in the form of the goddess's boat. You see, the head of a lion, or with the heads of a cat, and guides on the nose and stern. In the centre, as a symbol, stands the great goddess Bastet. On such a boat, as you remember, one of her cult statues was carried out during the holiday. And further, there is a huge granite box. It is called Naos, after the Greeks, under the ancient Egyptian Karchete, a secret box, so you can conventionally translate this term. It had golden doors, and inside stood the cult statue of the goddess. If you look closely, the roof of this Naos is pyramidal. The pyramids are reproduced in the form of Ben Ben, the first home sushi, on which, in the early times, the sun god created the universe, rising together with this hill from the bottom of the ocean. In 1887, found huge pieces of such a broken granite Naos. They are all present today in the British Museum's collection. The top of this Naos is a fragment with a roof. with this frieze. There are spirits on friezes. Further, there are a few more blocks on which the image is better preserved. King Nakthor Hep in the 4th century BC bows his knees to the sacred papyruses, the heraldic symbols of the Nile Delta. The great Nade, the mother goddess, feeds her baby, as well as Bastet feeds with sacred milk. Look at the red granite processing. Taking into account the gilding and incrustation of coloured glass over the precious stones of gold and electrum, which were impregnated and imprinted into this granite body of Naos, it was a giant jewellery box. The work, of course, was absolutely incredible. Another block, which is also kept in the British Museum, is the great Osiris, the Lord of eternal life, and the rare form of the sun god Atum, the monkey, and the goddess Euphemia, who shoots out of the bow all the enemies of the goddess if they appear here. We know what the statue of the goddess Bastet, which stood in the centre of its sanctuary. Fortunately, from the turn of the 8th and 7th centuries BC, a magnificent scroll, a mythological papyrus of the Delta, a hieroglyphic text described the main shrine of northern Egypt. As for Bastet, she's a woman with a lion face. She sits on the universal throne. Her legs are down. She's higher than the steps on which the defeated enemies are spread. The falcon protects her with its wings, and hippopotamuses surround her, images of the Nile gods around her. Judging by the height of this inner part, which was inside Naos, the statue was about 1.45 metres high. Similar things were always made of gold, silver, electrum, and other precious materials. Surprisingly, when in the 5th century BC the great Greek Herodotus, the great father of history, saw Bubastis, Bubastis was still a flourishing city, and in his famous story in the 2nd volume, which is dedicated to Egypt, he writes about the city as follows. This is the sanctuary of Bastet. The entire sanctuary, except for the entrance, lies on the island. 2 channels lead from the Nile to the entrance to the sanctuary, going separately. They flow around the temple on both sides. Each channel is about 37 metres wide and is covered with autumn trees. At the door of the temple, the height is about 19 metres, and it is decorated with wonderful statues in 3 metres high. The sanctuary is located in the middle of the city, and the view of it opens from all parts of the city. Since the city grows and rises on the hills, the sanctuary remains in its original place. So it is below, and it is accessible from the city from absolutely all sides. It is fenced with a wall decorated with reliefs, and inside it is a grove of mighty stone trees, which is like a great temple, where the statue of the goddess, the length and width of the sanctuary on each side is 1 stage. That is approximately about 180 metres. The road, paved with stone, leads about 530 metres long through the city market square to the east. Its width is more than 120 metres. On both sides of the road there are tall trees to the sky, and it leads to the great sanctuary. Later, when the archaeological excavations here is a very good reconstruction, here are these 2 channels. They form a lake. In the centre there is an island with a temple. A bridge leads there, and this whole island is a leaf of a water flower on which the goddess is born when dissolving at sunrise. That is, there is a symbol in absolutely every detail, and I of course interpret only the most superficial meanings of this symbolism to you today. The image of the festival of the goddess Bastet, it floats on its triumphant boat, Floating along the waters of the Pelusian River Nile, inside there is a cult statue. It is guarded by two columns with the image of the goddess Hathor, a huge sphinx tutu on its nose, which, according to the legend, with a fiery gaze kills all the enemies of the deity. But I am interested in something else here on the feed of oryx. Oryx is a desert antelope. It is a symbol of death. That is, on the one hand, the goddess is a triumph, gold, beautiful. But this caution, which is associated with the female deity, it is present here in the form of such a feeding part of the boat. Surprisingly, the same Herodotus describes the famous festival of Bastet in Bubastis, where up to 700,000 people gathered, not counting children. Women and men swim there together, and on each boat, many of those and others. Some women have rakes in their hands with which they rattle. Other men all the way play the flutes. The rest of the women and men sing and clap their hands. When they drive up to some city, they stick to the shore and do this. Some women continue to crack rags, as I said. Others call women from other cities, mock them. Dirty joke, third dance, and the fourth rattle their rags. They do this in every river city, where finally, upon arrival in Bombastis, they celebrate the festival with magnificent sacrifices. On this holiday, they drink more grape wine than for the rest of the year. And according to the locals, up to 700,000 people gather here, not counting children. And the festival was national. And for example, in the 12th century before the new era, the first pharaoh, Ramses IV, was proud of the fact that he never hunted lions and lions during the triumphant festival of the goddess Bastas in Bubastis, respecting the goddess's lioness nature. The goddess was associated with drunkenness. We remember the legend of Asemed in 1906. Collections of such amazing vessels made of gold and silver were found on the territory of the temple in Bubastis. One of the vessels on the neck was decorated with an amazing emblem in the centre of the mask of the goddess Hathor and two cats going to meet each other. For a long time, the symbolism of this image was incomprehensible, but in a few minutes I will tell you about it. Remember this vessel from Bubastis. In addition to the temple of the goddess Bastas, the blue circle, there was a cemetery of sacred cats, the red zone, and the green zone, a grand palace of the Middle Kingdom, where the royal sphinxes, colossi, the head of a huge royal statue in the British Museum, and a pair of books in the Cairo Museum. It was a capital, pompous royal city which surrounded the island on which you could look from the height of other buildings. Absolutely amazing sacred geography, amazing sacred landscape. This is what the necropolis of the goddess looked like. And here for many centuries, millions of cats were buried. I do not exaggerate, millions of cats. A person came to the temple. There, of course, lived a sacred cat, which was an oracle of the goddess. In addition to her, cats from all over the country. Plus, the person had a request. He brought a gift to the temple. This cat was embalmed. A prayer was recited on it. It belonged to these catacombs and believed that K, the active entity of the cat, would fly to the ears of the pre-eternal deity and give a prayer. Every mummy of a cat or other sacred animal that you see in museums is someone's prayer that they wanted to convey to the soul of the pre-eternal deity. When in 1886 Edouard Navel began his work here, he was horrified because all this place was covered with white cat bones. Locals tore up the mummies to get amulets or bronze statuettes to sell. To travellers who pass by the city of Bubastis, this is a civilised spectacle of the present day. This is my own shot. Here, in these small catacombs in sarcophagi, great cats were kept. I will quickly show you several images that you will definitely like. What is the great bastet of Bubastis? It can be a cat. It is a cat. It is a reliquary. It is hollow inside. It can be a woman with a cat's head. She shakes her sister, holds a lion's head in her hands and a guide, and kittens run at her feet, a symbol of her fertility. The 9th century BC, London, British Museum. It can be made of faience. It sits on a heavenly throne, shakes with a musical instrument, with its own rattle. Semet is on her throne. Semet has not gone far yet. Bastet is dangerous. At any moment, she can become a lion's head. And finally, as a true woman, she possesses all the secrets of the secret earthly world. Therefore, on her throne, a snake with arms and legs. This is the god Nehebkau. I will show it to you now. Is a creature that holds the secrets of the earth. All the secrets of the earth, all the secrets of the underground, all the secrets of the useful minerals with which Bastet is also connected. All these secrets are kept by the great Nehebkau, who's in the light of the great goddess, the ruler of Bubastis. A cat with kittens will be depicted here many times because she is fertile. And in Bubastis, there was even a legend that when kittens play on the road with something invisible, this great mother Bastet walks along the path and the cats play around her, in fact worshipping their mother. A magnificent faience thing, a collection of Myers from the Eton College from the 9th to the 8th century BC. The motherhood of the Egyptian cat was raised incredibly. I'll show you several wonderful things. This is a bronze image of a cat with kittens from the 8th to the 7th century BC. This is Brooklyn. This is Louvre. There is no canon here. There is a completely normal, such an amazing life, impressed with all love. Look here. This is the Louvre and this is the Metropolitan Museum. These are two different typical things. But this kitten, which stretches its paws to its mother, is absolutely amazing. And here, as it is impossible, all ideas about any frozen art of ancient Egypt, but here is such an impressive life as it really is. A famous cat, conditionally in the 2nd place after Geir Andersen. This cat is the Great Mother. It is more than 60 centimetres long. The Colusta Gulbenkian Museum in Lisbon, a famous oil magnate. If you're in Lisbon, visit his museum, a fantastic collection of visual art. My favourite 4 wooden kittens from the Louvre, the 6th century BC. A weight kettle. The weight is 30 gold rings. It was used on the weights in the temple of the goddess Baste. 30 gold rings can be bought at that time for 5 cows. This is a very large amount. Smithsonian Institute, Washington. An amazing image of a cat in the form of such a temple weight equivalent. But there are always a lot of cats. A magnificent phallic ring of the Virgin Mary. The 9th century BC. A cat and kittens in the swamps of the Delta. A modern ring with a sardonic cat. And there is a bracelet. Despite all the damage, it is wonderful. This is a bracelet of a princess, the wife of Thutmose III, the 15th century BC. Gold and sardonic cats on the bracelets of the royal wife, combined in such an amazing, very beautiful geometric ornament. Foyans, a private collection of Switzerland. Sardonic things. Metropolitan Museum, New York, about the family. 1.5 word. The wife of Bastet in Bubastis is revered by Atum, the god of the evening sun. The far right part of the illustration is the 14th century BC, before the god Atum, the crown of Upper and Lower Egypt. He is the great ruler of Cappadocia. His sacred animal, among many others, is a nevmon. This is a sarcophagus of a nevmon. On the left is a bronze one. This is a species of mongoose that fights with a snake and a cat. Their nevmon fights with chaos. They are able to defeat the snake. And this is Bastet and Atum here, united as a couple. The son of the great goddess Mahes, the god of storms, bad weather, rage. He is sometimes called the red-faced lord. He is the main defender from bad luck, trouble, deceit, some bad word. Again, double nature. On the one hand, bad weather. On the other hand, a great protection. He is depicted as a lion god, lion-headed, in the great crown of Atef. Here are some of his images. This is the main son of the goddess Bastet. A couple more words about two less known temples in which cats were worshipped. Central Egypt, Speos Artemidos. This place was called the Cave of Artemis. Originally, the ancient Egyptian name was Tainat Shitai, the Temple of the Hidden Valley. From the temple located on the eastern bank of the Nile, there was a valley inside which there were treasure hunts and the famous alabaster which Egyptians loved so much. As a result, here the Temple of the Hidden Valley was built by Hatshepsut, the very pharaoh woman of the 16th to 15th century BC. The temple was small and the rare form of the goddess Bastet, which was called Pahet, the one that scratches. The scratching goddess is a lioness wandering through the gorges, which on the one hand indicates the location of useful minerals, and on the other hand, after a meeting, it can become fatal with a lethal outcome. It is a very dangerous deity. The temple is actually a treated cave because the cave here is associated with the uterus of the mother goddess who entered the maternal womb and on the way out to get a new life. And the reliefs inside are preserved quite poorly because the memory of the pharaoh woman who was an illegitimate ruler was persecuted for them. Nevertheless, on the reliefs, the royal persons worshipped the great Bastet Pahet. Initially, the reliefs were all coloured inside this rocky space. The rooms go deeper and deeper. There's even a colour somewhere. Here you can see the amazing carvings that were once painted in the 15th century BC. And here are the scenes of coronation because Bastet has the secret ability to transfer magical power to the royal crowns. To make you understand what is depicted, I will show you a drawing. It is one and the same. It says, Semet Bastet Uridikau is powerful, that which is from a vessel with aromas is a great charm. And she awards the crowns along with the god Ammon to the knees of the worshipped from Shipsud, which is depicted in the image of the pharaoh man as she depicted herself all 22 years of her reign. And here once stood a cult statue, and you see the reliefs that preserve the image of the great goddess with a sun disk on her head, the great temple of the Hidden Valley, which apparently was once very beautiful. Behind this temple was found a huge necropolis of sacred cats, and the cats were found almost untouched. It was the end of the 19th century. 19 tons, 180,000 cats were taken out of here by the English and ground them all on bone flour for fertilisation on the fields around Liverpool. Not only the locals, Europe of the 19th century did not understand these things at all. This is the only cat that survived from these 180,000. Today it is kept in the Egyptian collection of the Liverpool Archaeological Museum. It does not occur to me how it could have been invented, but it was done. The great Ephesians, the famous capital of ancient Egypt, Ephesus, the most perfect of places, the most magnificent Karnak temple, which in its own territory exceeds the territory of WDNK in Moscow. The central part, dedicated to the god Amun, that far part with the lake, is dedicated to the goddess Mut, his great wife. The lake itself, which framed the temple of the goddess Mut, resembled the symbol of the moon. This lake was called Esher, and it was believed that in its waters the goddess finds peace. The goddess Mut, often depicted as a woman in the crowns of Upper and Lower Egypt, feeding here on the relief of the 13th century BC. Tsar Seti I is the sun with divine milk. On the one hand, she represented the highest kingdom. She represented the great universal order, and at the same time she represented the anger inaccessible even to the great goddess. But only in Maat, in the world order, she is the great queen. Not for nothing the Greeks identified her with Hera. And in the anger, when the world order is broken, this is what cannot be stopped. Like Esher, she was the great patroness of plagues, epidemics, epizootics, fire arrows, all the most terrible diseases. And at the same time, the temple was a famous hospital, because in all the temples of the angry goddess, there were such hospitals. When you enter the temple, it is heavily destroyed. You see the scene where the goddess appears in two of her apostasies. Here she is, like the great heavenly queen, and like Leviticus and Amit, she is also present here. The Tsar carries sacred instruments. The priests play the harp, the priests play the tambourine. The music in this temple of the goddess is very, very popular. In the courtyards of the temple, which have been explored by American specialists for many years, once during the Feast of Intoxication, young couples met. Sometimes there are orgiastic feasts to which Lamut, like the great heavenly mother, sang a lot of wine here. At the same time, wine was sometimes insisted on the slices of the temple mandragora, the great flower of the mother goddess, which on the one hand gives illusions and on the other hand is able to destroy the cells of the brain. That is madness and illusion. This is such an incredible game that is associated with the ideas about the uncontrollable power of the female character. That is, the female character is outside some kind of structure that can overwhelm it. It was this theme in the temple of the goddess Mut that was very important. The whole horseshoe-shaped lake Esher was lined up with more than 750 statues of the goddess Sekhmet. One triumphal Sekhmet, I will show it to you now, is absolutely incredibly good. This is the era of Amenhotep III, the 14th century BC, and it is angry, but again a symbol of eternal life, and again a papyrus that gives immortality. On her head is a crown of sacred snakes. Each such snake symbolizes Iadet, a fragment of the angry power of the mother goddess, which can be appeased. Iadet was also sometimes depicted in the Egyptian temple in the form of a snake with lion heads. The great queen was adorned during her temple services with music, singing, beauty, offerings, milk, aromas, jewels, and what else does the mother goddess like? She appeased the goddess so that she would not come in an angry form, but in a blessed one, bearing healing and giving secret oracles. The temple of the goddess Mut is one of the most famous oracles of the entire ancient world. Unfortunately, we do not know how this information was preserved, but the oracle was famous here. From here, numerous statues of the goddess Semet moved to many museums of the world. In the Metropolitan Museum there are 38, in the Vatican Museum 54, in the Louvre 17, one in the Hermitage. In 1837, our contemporary brought one such statue. Something remained on the shore of the lake. The best monuments, of course, have been brought out. I will show you two of the collections of the Egyptian Museum in Turin, the famous museum of the study of Turin, the second in terms of the collection, in terms of the volume of the Egyptian collection, after the Cairo Museum, not the Louvre, not the British Museum, not the Berlin Museum, but Turin. Look, what a flaming face. The ruler of rage, the goddess Boyne, the great mother of healing, who's present both sitting on the throne and standing, but always with signs of eternal life, and the sceptre of eternal youth. And here is such an image, absolutely touching and tender. She feeds her baby lion-headed child, in the image of which the Egyptian king was perceived. That is, he is a true child, the great mother of gods, who, according to the legend, in the canon of the goddess Mut, does not give birth to his own child, the lunar baby, in order to give his life powers to the king, because he is the keeper of the life forces of all earthly people, the ruler of all the Egyptian people. Since the temple of the goddess Mut is associated with the idea of childhood, of childbirth, there is a lot of BS. The ruler, remember, is the mother of the house, and in general, the Egyptian house, but only more powerful. And here, on the reliefs, the image of the birth of the goddess during childbirth, she gives birth to the power that she bestows on the ruling king. And here, in the temple of the goddess Mut, her baby is kept. I show you a relief from another sanctuary from Abydos, where this image is well preserved. In the 13th century BC, the king Seti I, in front of him is the baby of the god Amun. This is the baby of the goddess Mut, which we will be interested in now, and the baby of Khonsu, their son, the god of the moon. In front of the baby of the goddess Mut is a bowl, two cats, and Kador. Do you remember the bowl, the fragment of the vessel from Bubastis? This is a bowl with an intoxicating drink on mandragora, he said, and drank the tea, which is capable of pacifying the most furious form of the mother goddess, not to bring plague, not to bring epidemic, not to bring epizootics. This is a great drink of peace, and therefore the cats look at the goddess, Kador, as a result of the transformation of the goddess into the golden goddess of love. Well, I can't help but show this is my favourite statue of the goddess Mut from the collection of the Museum of Egyptian Art in Luxor, the 13th century BC. Look at the plastic, the era of Ramses the Great. Incredible beauty, elegance, subtlety. The only goddess who had in her temple a torch for the fire ritual destruction of those who broke the laws, despite the fact that there was no human sacrifice in Egypt, only in the temple of the goddess Mut. Rarely a person who broke the law of God was bound. In the same way, wax images of all the enemies of the Egyptian people, or the spirits of the new world which oppose the sun god, and so on and so forth, that is, the goddess is very angry, but at the same time such a great universal royal mother. And this is probably the most amazing. Her image from the collection of the Walton's Gallery in Baltimore. She is a feeding person. This is not a king, this is a child of the world, which the headless goddess gives through her breast, through her milk, to the great immortality, to the great gift of life. But not all goddesses have such furious images. There's also satire. The artists allowed themselves to depict such an impossible scene, a noble lady mouse who serves a cat. Well, everything is clear in the cat's face. Here is an apocola. The duck has to be carried. At the top too, a mouse, which is depicted as if on the scene of a feast. In front of her is such a luxurious fried duck. The poor cat, despite all this, wags her upper culass, as a servant usually wags a noble lady. There are scenes with images of a cat that grazes geese and tries not to look in their direction. This is also the nature of the cat. It is present in the humorous satire of Egypt. Here is another ostracon which I want to show you. It is also very funny. A cat at the moment of the feast in front of the victim. This is meat on the bone. There are vessels, but the duck is alive. This is also a mockery of the cat, although in fact it is depicted as such an object under the branches of the sacred sycamore. The last episode, which will be important to us today, is related to the role of the cat in the dead spaces. The cat is the keeper of the gates to another world. She is able to penetrate dreams. She is able to drive away nightmares. Her images were made on pillows and pillows. The cat is in front of the person who wanders at night because she knows the true way. And the cat, like a lion and a sphinx, keeps false gates on both sides. The gates of tombs that are open on the other side. The 14th century BC. Here is the right drawing. You see cats, images of falcons, and a huge door. This is a false door from the tomb of Amenhotep Surer. This is a reconstruction of a remarkable artist, Alexei Tokidlovsky. Cats keep the space. Cats accompany the soul of a person to another world. Cats become a protection for him. A sea of amulets. These are all amulets with mummies, or with the image of Bastet as a cat, or with Ahmed as a lioness. These are all with mummies. She is a great guide. She is a great protector. She is a great keeper of the hidden parts of the space. And she goes there herself. Turin, the Egyptian museum, the sarcophagus of the beloved cat of the 2nd century BC. Yes, it is not royal, but pay attention that for the Egyptian art that considered the size a reflection of the social status, he depicted a cat of the same height as himself. It is a personality for him. It is an image of an animal as a personality of the same height as a human. And the texts of the prayers of this person ask the gods of the other world to meet his beloved cat and not to refuse her in the sacrificial feasts in the fields of the other world. There are a lot of cats with mummies. The far right one is a mummy geometrically carved in the 1st century BC. On the left is a sarcophagus in the form of a cat figure that opens in half, and you can bury your beloved cat inside it. Both mummies are from the collection of Smithsonian Institute in Washington. Similar mummies are being explored. Here are scans on the tomography of amazing cats that give an opportunity to understand the origin of cats next to humans throughout all these distant times. To show that there are a lot of them, I show you a showcase of the sacred animals from the Louvre collection. Here are cats, mummies, sarcophagi of different eras, but especially of the 1st century BC, when the cult of cats was especially popular. In the era of turmoil and inter-ethnic wars, in the era of treason and the slow extinction of the culture, the cat is so understandable, so close, so dear, so not alien to a person. It gained a special popularity as a guide between man and his soul and the great mother of gods, whose ears should have heard the prayer. At that time, in the necropolis of Saqqara, which is located 30 kilometers south of Cairo, tombs of the epoch of Tutankhamun, for example, this tomb was used by the great noble lady Maya, who was a feeder of Tutankhamun for the new burial of sacred cats. Between these cats and the tomb where they were buried, there were 14 centuries, 1,400 years. And all these were parts of the same culture. Still there are excavations, French archaeologists led by Alain Zivy. Here you see a frame from the excavations, bronze images of mummy cats, texts, legends, and a huge layer of wisdom, which through the image of a cat in the art and culture of ancient Egypt spoke about the amazing, subtle, and unpredictable female character. Not for nothing, in the 1st century BC, the great Egyptian sage Anshishong, a contemporary of Cleopatra, among the texts of wisdom that he would like to pass on to his son, very figuratively, subtly and symbolically said, "Never laugh at the cat. As a postscriptum, I remind you that you have 2 more days." Sorry, I'll show you my image, but I can't help showing this emotion. One of the best cats in Russia, the collection of Prince Galitzin, who left Egypt in 1850, is kept in the collection of the Archangel Museum, which has not been exhibited since 1991. It has not been seen for a long time. It is still an amazing reliquary in which the head of the mummy of the sacred cat is kept. It is now in the State Literary Museum in the Duomia Ostrokova. If you have time on Saturday or Sunday, be sure to take a look at it, because it is an amazing monument. There is nothing like it in the class, neither in the Museum of Fine Arts of Pushkin, nor even in the State Hermitage. It is the only Egyptian monument in the collection of the Archangel Museum.